what is really being produced. So will it take a long time once the other oil gets into the system for prices to come down?
Yes, the price. I think the price on the big markets like the NYMEX in London, or more important in this case, the Brent in London, will come down fairly quickly. What may take time is for the price to be translated into the gasoline you buy at the pump. So that may take a little bit of time, and that price will stay up for a few more weeks after that, I believe.
Which part of the world, which region in the world is going to be most affected by this crisis that's taking place in Libya right now?
Oh, absolutely, it's going to be Europe, because that's where they get this petroleum. Libya's petroleum is going to Europe mostly, and it is a very sweet crude, very light crude, and the refineries in Europe are very well equipped for that. So they will have some delays in switching over to being able to take a heavier crude from Saudi Arabia or wherever, and that may take a little time. But Europe will be affected. One thing we probably should mention also is that the gas prices in Europe, natural gas prices may go up in Europe a little bit, because there is a natural gas pipeline between Libya and Italy, and that has probably been shut down by now. So that will have some impact on the supply of gas, at least to Italy.
Now, even though, as you say, the price might come down at some point in the future, could this increase in the oil price trigger off some kind of a recession around the world?
Well, I mean, if it stays up for quite a period of time, it certainly will. And I think the Saudis are very much aware of that possibility. They really would like to see the price of petroleum, of crude, to stay between $90 and $100, not much above that. So I think they will make a big effort through announcement and maybe even some major increases in production to cut to sort of kick the markets into pricing the prices down. It's as you mentioned, it's really a lot of it's psychology. And if the Saudis really say they're going to flood the markets, at least for a little bit, the price will come down pretty rapidly.
What about the fact that the Saudis are also saying that they want to invest more money in refurbishing or redeveloping existing fields? They're talking about $60 billion to refurbish these fields. What kind of an effect is that going to have? And will we see the effect in the short term?
No, that would take a very long time. But the Saudis have a 4 million barrel capacity they can play on right now. They produce 8.5 million barrels. Their capacity is 12.5 million. So they can relatively quickly increase production if needed, and they might do that. I think one of the fears of the markets is that people are saying, oh, well, if there are problems in Saudi Arabia, then of course it will be cutting the central bank of oil out of the market. But I don't think that's going to happen. I visited the fields a number of times in Saudi Arabia, and I mean, technically speaking, it would be very difficult for any kind of uprising to stop the production of oil unless it was a political decision at the top in Saudi Arabia, which of course is very unlikely to happen.
Okay, Mr. Cesnak, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
The White House has said it's imposing sanctions against Libya. Back now to Daljeet Jalawal at our Washington Broadcast Center. Daljeet.
Anand, thanks very much. Yes, the White House Press Secretary Jay Carney gave few details about Washington and the action that it would take, but he talked about the United States going ahead on its own and with its European allies. Carney made the comments as the ferry carrying hundreds of U.S. citizens out of Libya finally arrived in Malta. Our White House correspondent Patty Culhane has been following developments here in Washington.
The Obama administration indicating now that its diplomats are safely out of Libya, it's taking a tougher stance. They are looking at sanctions, possibly freezing assets, and saying that other options could be put on the table, hinting that it would be a no-fly zone. Importantly, they say the intelligence assets of the United States will be focused on Libya. Although they aren't specifying, that could mean high-altitude drones, satellites, eavesdropping, possibly even jamming the communications equipment of the Libyan military, trying to very obviously send a message to Colonel Gaddafi and those closest to him that the U.S. is watching, gathering evidence, and they could face war crimes trials.
Steve Clemons is director of the American Strategy Program at the New America Foundation. Earlier, my colleague Jane Dutton asked him if closing the U.S. embassy in Tripoli and imposing sanctions against Libya would have much effect on Gaddafi's actions.
These are steps in trying to not only send signals that the track that Gaddafi thought he was in, which was developing a better relationship with the United States and the West in general, is done. Synthesizing international pressure, I think you're going to be seeing these same kind of statements across the board from many other governments, is one part of, I think, a concerted effort to do things. And I think the range of options will range from the military to the economic to freezing personal assets, because you know, that's what we can do right now. What we can't do is it's very hard to be in the middle of those streets protecting people who are being victimized by this brutal regime.
But words like that, threats like that, condemnations, that's not going to make any impact on a man who is reportedly willing to open fire on his people, is it?
It may not make an impact on him. It may make an impact on those people directly around him, his retainers and closest advisors, and those people in the military who continue to be part of his power base. And so
that's the only way to get rid of him, through them?
Absolutely. In my view, it is either that or, you know, some form of brute force that the public somehow and these defecting parts of the military take on. But fundamentally, what we're trying to do is raise international pressure, but also put very specific pressure on people around him and give them a way out if they choose to take it. And that means that we hope they take action against Gaddafi.
How does a no-fly zone then play into that? And I know that you were at the White House on Thursday with Barack Obama. Tell us the discussions surrounding that and the fears and how it might possibly expose the U.S.
We have NATO capacity, sort of NATO South, if you will, in Italy, that could rather quickly put a dent in the ability to use helicopters or use any air-flying craft to attack their own citizens. That is a whole range higher, though, because it means military to military intervention. It would really, in my view, you would want to have the Arab League and the African League of Nations fully supported before you did something, because that could lead to a much greater complication and a regionalization of right now what is a civil war. But deploying a no-fly zone is one aspect of something of trying to protect the public, but it's not everything.
The U.S. has been saying, talking about its own public, that it's been concerned or has been reluctant to take any action because of U.S. citizens in the country. Is that just another stalling process, or is there any truth?
No, I think it was very true. I think one of the fair critiques, and I don't know the backstory, is why did we have 32 U.S. personnel so late in Libya when these protests looked so certain? And you saw a dynamic coming in, and I think everyone knew Libya was in the sort of bowling alley of those that were going to possibly be there, because that then hindered our ability to be more strident and strong on the front end. I'm not saying that Susan Rice, Hillary Clinton, and Barack Obama didn't say many of the right things, but many of our fundamental actions were preempted in fear that this lunatic leader who was at war with his people would gather U.S. and other Western personnel and hold them as hostage.
Steve Clemens talking to my colleague Jane Dutton a little earlier on. And that's it from Washington for now. Anand, back to you in Doha.
Thanks, Daljit. Now, Al Jazeera has obtained pictures of what appears to be police firing on protesters in the Iraqi city of Fallujah. Demonstrations against corruption and a lack of basic services have turned deadly in the country. At least 12 people have been killed in anti-government rallies across Iraq. Tarek Bazley reports. Apologies, we don't have that report ready right now. Let's move on. Several people have reportedly been killed and many others wounded after security forces opened fire on pro-democracy demonstrators in Aden City in the south. Tens of thousands of people also took to the streets of the capital in other parts of the country. Demonstrators who've been staging rallies for weeks are calling for the immediate resignation of President Saleh. Officials say Bahrain's King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa has sacked 3 ministers who caused crisis after the latest unrest. Earlier, tens of thousands of protesters gathered at Manama's Pearl Square after Friday prayers. They carried flags and chanted slogans calling for unity between Sunni and Shia. They also demanded that the king and his government step down. Friday has been declared a national day of mourning, a week after 7 people were killed in clashes with security forces. There's plenty ahead in sport, including can the world #1 Caroline Wozniacki continue to power through the field at the Qatar Ladies Open? Time for sport right now.
Start with World Cup cricket, and the co-hosts Bangladesh have recorded a first victory of the tournament. They beat Ireland in a low-scoring but very tense match in Mirpur in Dhaka. After choosing to bat first, Tamim Iqbal got the home side off to a rollicking start in this Group B clash. But after he was dismissed for 44, the Bangladesh batsman really struggled on the slow pitch and accurate Irish bowling. They were eventually bowled out for 205. The Irish starting cautiously themselves, but crucially, they lost regular wickets. Kevin O'Brien kept things interesting with an innings of 37, but then Shaiful Islam took a match-winning 4 for 21 to help bowl out Ireland for 178, giving the home side victory by 27 runs. In the early match between Australia and New Zealand in Nagpur, there was a minute's silence for the victims of the Christchurch earthquake. New Zealand's players could be forgiven for having other things on their minds, and their batsmen certainly couldn't cope with Australia's quicks. They were reduced to 73 for 6. A 50 from Nathan McCullum helped the Kiwis achieve a modest 206 all out. But the Australians had little trouble reaching their target. Openers Watson and Haddin put on 133 for the first wicket, and the world champions reached their target for the loss of just 3 with 16 overs to spare. They've now gone unbeaten for 31 World Cup matches, their last defeat coming more than 11 years ago.
You know, the first game was a really steady start for us in the tournament. I think today we all expressed ourselves a bit better today against a good New Zealand side. So 2 from 2, we've got a big game coming up against Sri Lanka in their conditions, and we've got a week to get ready for that game. So we should be spot on as far as our preparation is concerned.
Meanwhile, England are preparing to face India on Sunday, having never won the competition. But opening bowler Stuart Broad says the side is growing in confidence and hoping to change its history, despite an unconvincing performance against the Netherlands.
World Cups, we've got to a few finals, but we haven't won it, and that's obviously in the past. I think in the past, since sort of Andy Flower's taken over, we have been changing the history of English cricket a little bit. In the fact we won our first ICC tournament in the 2020 World Cup. We won in Australia for the first time in 24 years. So we are achieving things that other England teams probably haven't. But it's obviously a World Cup is on our radar here. We've got the confidence of winning big tournaments.
Australian Open tennis champion Novak Djokovic has reached the Dubai Championships final for the 3rd successive year after beating 3rd seed Thomas Berdych in the semis on Friday. It was by no means a routine win, though. Berdych took the first set on a tie-break.